Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live stream. My name's Dave Lee. I'm Bloomberg Opinion's US technology columnist based in New York. Joining us on this is Liam Denning. He's also in New York and he covers energy with a focus on Elon Musk and Tesla. And from the Starship Enterprise, it looks like, in our London HQ is Parmy Olson, who covers tech from London with a focus on AI. And our subject today is, well, I feel like it's a subject we come round to fairly often. It's Elon Musk, the state of what he's doing. Where's his mind at? What's he being distracted by? Is his focus where it needs to be? And there's plenty to unwrap in that. So we're going to dive straight into it. Liam, thanks for joining us. You were following Tesla's earnings that came out yesterday evening. And well, give us a tale of the tape. What do we learn from that, and how do you think it sort of speaks to our subject today of how Elon is handling his many businesses?
So yeah, thanks, Dave. I think this is one of your classic examples of the market either looking ahead or looking back. So the numbers, the first quarter numbers, were predictably pretty bad. Tesla had that shocking drop in sales in the first quarter, and that was very evident in the numbers. Margins collapsed. They actually had a lower operating margin than General Motors, which is fairly notable. And first cash burn since early 2020. So that was all pretty much to be expected, but still noteworthy. What Tesla did do was it changed its outlook. So what's happened this month is the stock has been dropping because of all this negative news flow. First of all, there was this Reuters story that popped up saying that they had abandoned their cheap EV project, and Musk accused Reuters of lying, but then he immediately pivoted to saying they were going to have a Robotaxi reveal in August. Now, this did not go down well with the market because that cheap EV is basically the basis of everyone's forecast for growth for the next few years. And as much as they love the Robotaxi stuff, no one's really plugging it in too much to their models. He then had, fairly significant C-suite departure, big job cuts, a lot of turmoil, basically. And so this was their attempt to right the ship last night. They talked about having new models coming out soon, maybe even by the end of this year, including a cheaper or a cheap-ish EV. A lot of talk about AI, as you might expect. The Optimus robot made an appearance there. Even Elon at one point was riffing about, turning parked cars into a kind of giant networked AWS competitor. This is all fairly standard stuff, but it's all attempt.
Fairly standard stuff is quite
standard,
something,
sorry,
isn't it, for Elon Musk? Yeah.
Standard stuff for Tesla, but it's particularly standard stuff when the numbers are bad and they're trying to reframe the discussion around the vision thing.
And just on the cheaper car, so there was the Model 2 as it was being described. Reuters had this story saying they've scrapped that. That's over. The market freaks out because, as you say, that was the basis of where they thought the growth was going to come. A car that was, I believe it was it $25,000 was the sort of target price, which would have been a huge deal, opening up Tesla to many people. But now they're talking about a different type of affordability by doing what? By making the higher end car cheaper to make and therefore cheaper to sell. I mean, explain that to us.
Yeah, it's a little difficult because obviously they announced this. It's a few lines in the announcement, and then you expected maybe a bit more discussion on the call. But Musk effectively shut that conversation down. There is an air around this, to be honest, of a company that watching its valuation decline, and let's be clear, the stock was down about 40%, but it's still trading at 50 times earnings heading into this call. It's not a beaten down stock by any means, but a company that was trying to execute some kind of radical shift in the narrative here and a strategic pivot. Now on the cheap EV in particular, you have to go back to March of last year where Tesla did this big analyst day talking about this and how they were going to reinvent the manufacturing process and come up with this new vehicle. And it got everyone excited. Now, what they're talking about now is essentially they're saying, well, we'll have a cheaper model. It won't be quite as cheap as that. But on the other hand, we're going to do it in such a way that it kind of blends existing technology with new platforms that we're developing, and we'll be able to manufacture it on our existing lines. To me, what this reads like is, you have to step back and say, this is a company. If you just look at it as a car company, it's got an aging lineup. It's been cutting prices to try to juice sales. That has not worked, which is why the margins have collapsed. It needs a new vehicle, and it needs it quickly, and it needs it to be cheaper, because it's really struggled to get the cost of manufacturing down. And that was where I think they were going last night with this announcement. They're saying, look, we'll be able to do this efficiently. It'll come out quicker than you anticipate, but we don't actually have anything to show you right now. Come back to us in like 5 months.
I mean, this feels like the way I used to sort of act as a student, right? I haven't quite done what you're asking, but guess what? When I eventually do, it's going to be fantastic. I mean, I think when there'll be people watching this, and I should say actually, for people who are watching this, you can send us questions whether you're on X or TikTok or YouTube, and I will see them. I'll be able to put them to Liam and Parmy. But as people watch this, and they'll say, well, why does anyone believe him anymore, right? Because he keeps on breaking promises. He's very late if he does achieve things. And you mentioned that stock drop, but I mean his words seem to have helped. I mean, I just refreshed a moment ago. I stock is up almost 16% this morning. So,
or as I like to call it, one General Motors.
well, I mean, doesn't that just underline the kind of almost absurdity of this? I mean, what is it you think that investors like? Why do they keep? I don't want to say falling for it, because that would suggest that I think Elon's necessarily lying, but he does sort of bend the credibility of what he says by just not following through, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things. You have to acknowledge that Elon did basically invent the electric vehicle market. I mean, he didn't invent the technology, but he did bring the mainstream. I mean, the Model S was a truly transformational vehicle. So was the Model 3. So was the Model Y. Cybertruck maybe less so, but he has that kind of in the bank, right? And he did it against all the odds. And when a lot of people, myself included, were really skeptical at times because, of the difficulties the company faced in manufacturing, plus, Elon's fairly erratic behavior sometimes. And I think the market has been, or the investors have been conditioned to sort of take what they're given, because there is this idea that no matter what setbacks there might be and the delays and all that stuff, that Elon has it within him to kind of pull something out of the bag, right? Because he did all that in the past. Now, for me, I look at it and I say the stock trades at 50 times, 50 times earnings. That's, there is a lot of goodwill already priced in there. And by the way, that's down 2/3 from the peak. I mean, in late 21, it was what, 1.2 trillion. So yeah, I think there is just there's this mystique, option value, whatever you want to call it, that persists. And I think it's why, even though last night's call to my ears was, vague, it felt like a rushed pivot that was just being communicated to help arrest the slide in the stock. It was enough, right? The stock's up 56, 60 billion today.
I guess, and Parmy, I'll bring you in here. Thank you for joining us in your afternoon over there. I guess one of the differences now compared to when Elon was building Tesla is that it felt, when he was building Tesla at that point, he was very much focused on doing that. That was his main full-time job, if we to put it in normal terms. Now he runs X. It seems to be a big distraction. Investors were asking about this yesterday, wondering how he's spending his time. To what degree do you think Musk has been sort of consumed by X since he purchased the site in what was it, 2022?
I think massively consumed. It's kind of become like a trophy asset for him. He doesn't have any investors to answer to. He has upset a lot of advertisers, but it doesn't seem that he sees them as stakeholders for him to answer to. He really sees it, I think, as this kind of ideologically driven mission that he has, kind of similar to his mission to turn humanity into a multiplanetary species. He wants Twitter to be this global public square, to the extent that he is willing to go head to head with heads of states and Supreme Courts in various countries. And that is, and to answer your question, 100%, I think, especially in these last few weeks, he's been going head to head with Australia, head to head with Brazil, and in some cases with heads of states. In the case of Australia, this was related to a video of a stabbing attack that took place in a church in Sydney not too long ago. And X has refused to remove the videos. And he has said, kind of in response to government officials in Australia about that X is the only truthful platform. And he's kind of framing himself as this kind of upholder of free speech and truth. Whereas the government officials are kind of coming back and saying, well, no, we are actually trying to stop harm from spreading on the platform. And in Brazil, the situation is kind of similar, in that there were some accounts that have been reactivated on Twitter that have been described by a Supreme Court justice there as being a kind of digital vigilantes or digital militias, that have been spreading fake news and supporting some messages, supposed hate messages of the former far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro. And again, there had been some assurance from, I think there had been some miscommunication actually between Brazil and X about whether those accounts were being reactivated or not activated. But this justice has said, no, actually they are on. And now X has until Friday to explain why it hasn't blocked those accounts. And it just seems like this is just yet another standoff. Musk doesn't seem like he has any intention of removing the accounts or blocking them. Once again, justifying this as being an issue of free speech, and kind of calling these government officials censors. This is a kind of this is an issue of censorship. But of course, this all comes down to whether you think that content moderation on social media sites and censorship are the same thing, and they are not. But Elon Musk is saying that they are.
I think one of the things that strikes me about the way Elon approaches this is, Twitter, of all the social networks, it was in the pre-Elon Musk days, Twitter was the one that was always in court, fighting back against essentially a lot of the same things, right? I mean, they were very forceful against some of India's pretty draconian moderation demands. They were, even in cases in the US when authorities would want details and users, they made sure that it was a firm process. Elon Musk is almost kind of doing the same thing, but his sort of, it seems to me, the sort of dopamine hit he gets from having a fight undermines his credibility to do that in a way that seems professional, in good faith. I mean, his personality is almost half of his problem, isn't it, at times?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of been baked into the culture of X now, which is a complete 180-degree turn from where it was before he bought the company. It was a completely different approach to content moderation. And just as another example of that, a few months ago, there was this fake audio of the UK government opposition leader, Keir Starmer, and it was posted on Twitter, and it was basically this fake audio of him bullying a member of staff and swearing. And it sounds like him, but it's using a generative AI voice cloning tool. And the funny thing is that Twitter X, in its terms of use, actually bans the use of this kind of misleading, fake AI-generated content. But when what I've heard from people who have kind of tried to break this post down is that when officials in the Labour Party went to Twitter to say, this is not Keir Starmer, this is fake audio, can you please take it down? They really resisted because they said they wanted proof that it wasn't him. And I think, to me,
and how do you do that?
How are you going to prove
Yes,
that?
yeah.
And I think, to me, like, that is probably, maybe this is not high up enough for that to have been an Elon Musk decision, but my sense is that this act of kind of just a knee-jerk resistance to any kind of request from governments now to take things down, is just kind of baked into the culture of Twitter now. So I suppose you could say, you know, he's done enough that he's delegated that act and that approach to his management and to his engineers and to his policy teams. And just going back to answer your earlier question, but I still think this is probably taking up too much of his time, and we've heard it before. I'm sure Liam would agree that Tesla investors are just kind of fed up with how much time he's been spending on this.
Well, tell us about that, Liam. I mean, what's you know, you talk to Tesla investors and you cover the company closely. Like, what is the sense there of Elon's time management, I guess would be the polite way to put it.
So I think it causes some consternation. You know, it came up in a question on the analyst call last night, and it's, you know, it's unusual on a company call for the CEO to be asked by an analyst, you know, are you actually interested in running this company? But
do you even want to be here?
Yeah,
that's basically the tone of the question,
right?
Not
the usual question you get, but you know, again, I think it's one of those things that's just kind of baked in. It's like, oh, it's just Elon, right? I mean, I think there have been times in Tesla's history where Elon's behavior has, I think, really exposed the company to risk. I mean, the obvious one that springs to mind was when he did the whole like funding secured thing in 2018. He exposed himself and he exposed the company to real legal risk. There were repercussions, but nothing, you know, it turned out to not be that existential. But I think at the margin, there has to be a concern that it's not just a question of him being distracted. And, you know, clearly Tesla is in a moment right now that I would actually compare to what things were like in 2018 when it was struggling with manufacturing the Model 3, and there was clearly pressure on the company, clearly pressure on him, and it was showing up in his behavior. And you obviously want the CEO to be very focused on the company at that moment. I think the other aspect to this, again, it's a little nebulous, but, you know, particularly here in the US, there is this correlation between Tesla's being bought, you know, mostly in blue-leaning states, and there have been noises around, you know, will Musk clear, you know, rightward-leaning and, you know, frankly, sometimes offensive behavior lead people to not buy those vehicles. Now, I'm kind of on the fence about that because, you know, correlation is not necessarily causation. EVs tend to be popular in California, which is very blue, but they also tend to be popular in urban areas, which are also blue, coastal states, that kind of thing. So it's not necessarily it's not necessarily true that political leanings drive EV buying. But what I would say is, you know, buying an EV in the US right now, it requires the driver to make some compromises, right? They have to think about things like range anxiety, charging, getting a charger installed at home, you know, just operating their vehicle in a different way and paying a much higher, you know, a much higher price than they would for a comparable regular vehicle. And so you don't want to put up additional obstacles. And if one of those additional obstacles is, you know, I don't like the way the CEO behaves, on the margin, might that swing a decision? It might. And maybe that doesn't matter if you're growing sales at 50% a year, but when they're dropping, you probably want to do everything you can to not get in the way of that buying decision.
And is the drop in sales? There's obviously there's a downturn in the market generally for EVs, but are we seeing Tesla losing share here to because you know, obviously compared to when Tesla first started making these cars, it was pretty much on its own and people didn't think it could even do that. Now there's a lot more competition out there. Are we seeing a kind of a market share shift at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what I would say is that EV sales are still growing globally. They're still growing in the US, although the growth rate has slowed markedly. I think in the first quarter in the US, they're only up a few percentage points. Globally, though, they're still growing, a reasonable clip. Um, but I think the problem Tesla faces is, yes, it was the first mover. It has enormous brand value, but the lineup is just very old.
Mm.
The Model S is more than a decade old. The Model 3 is what? That's getting on for like 6 years now. Even the Model Y, is 4 or 5 years old, which is why it's so important for them to release a new product. And the Cybertruck attracted a lot of attention, but right now it's attracting attention for, I don't know, like glued on gas pedals.
Yes.
It's super expensive, and it's just a really weird design choice, and the early reviews have not been great. Like, that is not the vehicle that's gonna get them more market share. What you really need in the US, and this actually came out of the International Energy Agency's annual update, which coincidentally came out yesterday as well. You look at affordability charts for different EV markets. The US is so high, even with subsidies. The total cost of ownership, it takes years of ownership to break even, versus buying a comparable gasoline fueled
Mm.
vehicle. The EV market in the US desperately needs a new, cheaper set of platforms. Um, Tesla should be the natural company to do that. However, I think they wasted a lot of time on the Cybertruck, and now they're clearly scrambling to get to kind of move in that direction a little bit. But as
Is
of now, we
is
don't really know what it is.
is Elon Musk actually? Is something I've always wondered about the Cybertruck. Is he framing it as a mainstream vehicle? Does he actually expect people to buy it and drive it on the roads? Like, it just, whenever I look at it, I just think surely this is like he's living in the future. This is something he expects, kind of a fringe style frontier type technology.
Yeah, I mean, the messaging is a little mixed, right? Because he talks about it very much in terms of, this is what the future looks like, and it has the bulletproof glass that isn't actually bulletproof, or whatever it was called, and then the stainless steel exterior, which is, from what I can see, the only reason it has that exterior, which is problematic in all sorts of ways, is like they wanted it to be bulletproof for reasons that escape me.
Yeah, it's kind
It's
of a dystopian view of the future.
Yeah,
Whenever I
yeah.
look at it, I just think he envisions us living in Mad Max.
It's also super heavy. Like, if that, it's basically like having an F-150 truck that accelerates at the speed of a Porsche. So, if that thing gets into a crash, anything on the other end of it is gonna be in real
Wow.
trouble. But
Yeah.
I think the mixed messaging is, they've still talked about selling 250,000 of these things a year within a few years.
Wow.
Honestly, I can't see it, particularly given all the problems that have emerged. But yeah.
Also the recall recently, the number that had to be recalled was pretty low, right? It was less than 4,000, which accounted for all of them that are out there now. I mean, was that a case of they've not been able to make them and deliver them quickly enough? Because at one point there was 2 million pre-orders for the Cybertruck. I mean,
yeah, but remember,
that's a bit of a
for that pre-order, you only had to put down a refundable $100 deposit. So,
oh, I see.
That's
I'll take 5.
Yeah, exactly, and people did. But no, I think it's hard to read into the numbers now, because the thing was only launched, I think it was the end of November. So it was always going to be a low number. But I do struggle to see, right now the only models that are available, as far as I know, are priced at like 80 grand and upwards.
Hmm.
So it's just, by definition, it's going to be a niche product.
We're coming towards the end, but I want to sort of shift this kind of like the way out here for Elon is AI, right? And we've got it talking yesterday, and he's the plan for Robotaxi at Tesla, but then also at Twitter as well. Palmer, you've seen Grok has been something that he's put out there in the world. and he has another company, of course, with XAI. Have I remembered that right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
XAI. I'm losing track of his companies. I don't know how he does it. But in terms of the standing of Elon Musk in the AI world, like, what are his company's contributions here to that race when you put them up against OpenAI and Anthropic and all these other companies?
Can't discount it. When he first announced XAI a few months ago, I was speaking to someone who led a large AI company in Silicon Valley, and they scoffed immediately and said, "Oh, it's all junior AI researchers. There's no one of note." But then other people have said the opposite, that actually he managed to lure some quite big rock star AI engineers to his company, and he has open sourced Grok, his AI model, this large language model, which is basically like a competitor to ChatGPT. He's open sourced it, and he takes a very personal view on that because he has said that AI shouldn't be controlled by a few companies, which actually there's quite a lot of people agree with that. I agree with that to some extent as well. And I think in a way that could stand him in good stead in the AI community, because AI researchers aren't comfortable with keeping their research proprietary. They actually like it when their research is published, not just because it gives them credibility and prestige, but also because the spirit of the open source community is sharing research and thereby through collaboration, improving algorithms and making these AI models more capable. So this move to open source his AI model, Grok, was actually, I think, quite a smart move on his part in terms if he wants to attract more talented engineers to work for him. I think if he'd gone down the closed source route, that would have looked quite hypocritical given his criticisms of OpenAI, and I think it would have also been harder to kind of gain the street cred that he probably wants from the AI research community.
And he's suing OpenAI over that matter as well, right?
And he is.
So it would have been very hard to make that argument. Yeah.
Yeah.
Liam, AI is obviously a big part of Tesla's future. The Robotaxi thing. I mean, he seemed to think, and he said in the call yesterday, he said, as long as the Robotaxi is half as safe as a human, or how did he phrase it? As long as it had half the danger of a human driver, then regulators would be happy for it just to go out there on the roads and do its thing all over the place. And I just wondered, that seemed naive to me. Like, regulators have been very cautious about full self-driving on the streets of the US so far.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think there's zero tolerance for a robot, in quotes, injuring or killing a pedestrian or another passenger. We're just not wired to accept that. I think there's a few things worth saying about the whole Robotaxi thing. First of all, it is central to the valuation. If you look at even the most bullish analysts on the street at their models, the business of manufacturing and selling EVs, which to me is still just an amazing high growth, high potential business, is now a fairly small fraction of the purported valuation of Tesla. All the upside is in things like robotaxis and in this Uber-like ride-sharing thing he talked about, in general AI applications, that sort of thing. But I think there's a few things to say on that. First of all, Musk's impulse to oversell things mean that no article about Tesla's robotaxi ambitions at this point is complete without first listing all the times in the past that Elon has talked about robotaxis being just around the corner, and clearly none of that has happened.
I mean, it was 6 or 7 years ago, wasn't it, when he said, "Oh, very soon the car will drive itself from New York to San Francisco," right, or whatever it was. Yeah.
2019, he held a whole analyst day about it, and he was talking about 1 million potential robotaxis being on the street, and just still yet to see that happen. And I think one thing that's worth saying here is the case study of Cruise at GM. Cruise absolutely hit a wall in San Francisco last year, and it was mainly because they were trying to grow too fast, and they weren't they weren't getting all the things they needed in place to do it. And you contrast that with Waymo, which has been very, very slow and methodical, and that has paid off for them. Now, they don't go out there and say we're going to have 1 million robotaxis on the street tomorrow. They just do the hard work of making this very difficult thing work. And the last thing I'd say is just there was a really interesting and sort of comical moment on the call last night where Elon was comparing the development of AI and robotaxis to the development of the elevator, and he had that really strange line about how elevators used to fall and cut people in half. It was, again, one of those things you don't expect to hear on an earnings call. But the thing is, like, it is a useful analogy. That is a technology that it had to be accepted. It is an autonomous moving technology that had to be accepted by people. But the bit that Elon left out were two things, really. One is lifts only go up and down. Like, that's a fairly simple thing to perfect, as opposed to a vehicle traveling in all sorts of situations, in all sorts of directions. And two, even then, it took decades to get elevators right and perfect the technology and do all the other things that make an elevator acceptable, that you're willing to step into it and have it take you up 50 foot. I mean, we don't think about it now, but back in the day, that was a fairly radical thing to do. So, I think he just has this tendency to constantly oversell it. And, we're in one of those moments where, frankly, for the sake of the stock price, he kind of needs to.
I agree. I think one big difference as well is that if you decide to get in an elevator, that's your call. You could be affected by a self-driving car that you've had no agreement in
None
using.
of us are being menaced by elevators.
No. Indeed. Right. We need to wrap it up there. But thanks to you both for this interesting chat. I'll be checking the replies on Twitter and YouTube and TikTok if anyone wants to have any thoughts post this conversation. I will respond to the ones that are asked politely, I'll just say. But thanks for joining us. We do these live streams fairly often, and you can find all of our work at bloomberg.com/opinion. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.